So good evening, Rotarians and colleagues in peace. I'm Jim Alderman, as you've heard many times before, chair of the District 5450 Peace Committee that sponsors the forum for discussion. I do not know anyone that has as many ongoing activities at one time, yet manages to develop each to its magnificent fruition. We're so pleased that Katherine Hughes-Fraitekh was able to find time and stop long enough to share some of her magnificent efforts for peace. A Rotary Peace Fellow from Chulalongkorn, Thailand, she's an educator, a supporter of many peace programs, and an inspiration to all that know her. And I assume all that you read her extensive bio so as not to lose any more of the time. Katherine, the screen is yours.
Okay, thank you, Jim. And it's so great to be with so many wonderful leaders and mentors and, people that have worked so long for peace. I am learning as a Rotary Peace Fellow, there are many Rotarians doing important work, but I keep feeling there's like this core of people that really are driving the work for the peace building and conflict transformation and ending war. And there are just a number of you on here today, and so I'm honored to be with you and be a part of this. And thank you for inviting me, Jim. And I would say that I am involved in lots of things all the time, but I'm not sure they all come to magnificent fruition. So thank you for that. But I have to be honest that there are still many in progress, and several of them I learned from failure as well as success, and the people that I work with as well. So I wouldn't want to, have that said and not kind of counter that piece. I'm going to go ahead. I am going to be doing a PowerPoint. I had gone back and forth about whether to do that because sometimes I can just kind of talk and discuss, but we will have time for comments, questions and answers, and input. And I know, again, this room is full of experts, so that would be really helpful and useful, I think, for all of us and for me. If you want to comment or stop me and say something as I'm going, that's fine too. I'm pretty good at kind of circling back around and being able to answer things or comments, so feel comfortable doing that. And I see Helen too, another one of those that I was mentioning coming on. And so basically what I'm going to talk about tonight, and you saw the overview, is this idea of synergizing nonviolent action and peace building, kind of under this whole umbrella of conflict transformation that I think describes a lot of the really important work that's going on around the world in the field and at the grassroots level that then also can kind of simmer up and really impact both national and international policy and change that is so critical right now. And we know that we're in a very difficult time in the world. We're close to the nuclear clock to 12 a.m. We are spending more and more money on military and arms and killing when we have more and more human needs around the world. Climate crisis is another huge existential threat that's we're facing and not doing so well at. Really, we're not making the progress that we need to be making. And for me, over the years, and I've been working on this maybe 35 or more, I have really come to believe that the grassroots are the key to really this change and success, that locally led wisdom, direction, and also the fact that you really can't create a social justice movement or a peace building movement from the outside. You can support it, you can act in solidarity with it, you can help fund some of their needs, but you really, unless they're willing to take the lead, knowing the local knowledge, the wisdom, and also, paying the price and paying the cost for change, which can be great sometimes, it really doesn't keep moving. It's not sustainable. So I have chosen to really work with grassroots movements around the world. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about these kind of techniques and commonalities that the group that I co-founded back in 2000 share. And then I'll talk a little bit about Solidarity 2020 and Beyond, which is really fun because it was co-founded by 3 Rotary Peace Fellows when we were at Chulalongkorn University. And that, to me, including some other boards I'm on, Solomon Odero and Day Africa, many of you know as well. We're doing a global grant and finally getting to the end. I think we've got it about funded now, thanks to many of you. And so I just have seen the impact that my involvement in the mid-career program in Chulalongkorn and your investment from Rotary and Rotary Peace Fellows has really made a big impact. And we've really been able to do a lot of work together. So that's another really fun thing being with you today. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And as I said, if there will be some things I'll ask you to maybe respond in the chat, just so it can be a little more interactive. And again, if there's questions or comments or what have you, I'll try to keep track of the chat as well. And maybe Jim can help me as well. So basically, we're starting with synergizing peace building and nonviolent action. I did a talk on this 5 years ago, maybe, for the Rotary Action Group for Peace. It's been a while. It was on International Peace Day, I remember. And so this will include some of those elements, but it is much broader, and it will include a lot more now about Solidarity 2020 and beyond in the work I'm helping facilitate with that an international network organization, since at the time that was not even founded. So let's get started with this, and hopefully, let me just see, it's not returning well, so I'm just going to make sure that it's not frozen. Let's see, why would that not be? There we go. Okay, sorry, we'll go back. Okay, so when you think of peace building overall, what words come to mind? And if you could just put some things in the chat that come to your mind, one word, a person, a place, an initiative, anything that you think of when you think of the word peace building. Okay, so we've got Suzanne, connections, human needs, John, listening, justice from Quanta. Keep going, security, yep. What else? Collaboration, great, Mike, yep. So a lot of these kind of hope, another good one right now, kind of catchwords and core words for the field of peace building. What I've started with here are just two examples for me, and these both come from Solidarity 2020 and Beyond members. On the left is Ruth Mumbi, who is a prominent human rights activist and peace builder from Kenya, from an informal settlement in Mathare. And it's one of the largest, they would call them also slums, urban slums in the world, and one of the largest in Africa. And Ruth has been now recognized by the Carter Center for Peace and Justice and their program. She was a human rights defender with Frontline Defenders, but she's always worked in the grassroots. And here she's holding a baby that was actually named after her by this woman that she's with. And this woman, she's hosting her at her home in Nairobi. And this woman was displaced during COVID. It was around 2022. And the Kenyan government threw out a lot of people that were housed in these informal settlements in the middle of COVID. So they didn't have anywhere they could go. They were all supposed to be having masks and not interacting. They were really worried about, they didn't have healthcare available, and they pushed them out, and they were really living on the streets. There was this whole area of maybe 5,000 people. Many of them were women and single mothers. And so Mumbi went into action, got organized, got the press organized, got people mobilized, put out the word, got some funding to help them, got them housed across the city in different spaces so that they didn't, die of, it was raining, it was cold, it was in winter at the time. And so here's a picture of her, with a woman who named her new baby. She was pregnant when this all happened, and then she had the child with Mumbi. So that is one way I see peace. The second photo, and Tom may recognize this, is Basudef and Sushil Adhikari, and they are two blind brothers in Nepal that are members of our network. And they are amazing. Basudef was born blind, and Sushil became blind at age 8 from a mistake with some local medicine that he took for a childhood illness. And Sushil will tell you what a beautiful life I've had. I was sightless, but I was also, I could see at one point, and I've seen the strengths and what comes with both states of ableness. And he and his brother are very high tech. Vasudev is an air traffic controller in Nepal, using technology for that. And Sushil works with technology on computers, and they help people that are lower caste, that are that are in the poor category in Nepal, who have also disabilities, both that they got from the earthquake and from injuries, but also, you know, if they have them naturally or were born with being hard to hear, sight issues, and issues with ability to walk and being in wheelchairs. And they run community centers. They do all this economic empowerment. And they also do a lot with pushing for disability rights policies in Nepal, across the country, so that you know, people will have, it's not just about a handout or an economic development, but they're also mobilizing for change and pushing for new policies that give better access to education and transportation, et cetera. And then I have more in the chat. So we have education and knowledge with Larry, love and acceptance with Barbara, Peter, conflict resolution. Yep. Harmony, respecting all voices from Tom. So I appreciate all of those. Next, we're going to look at, and for some reason, sorry, my computer just keeps freezing. I don't know whether it's too loaded or what's going on. So I'll just looks like it may take a back and forth to get it moving again. Okay. When you hear the term nonviolent action or civil resistance, what comes to mind? And can you put some things in the chat that you think of with that? And here are two photos that for me are very meaningful with that word in that area of work. Okay, so reclaiming dignity, Suzanne, great. Mass movements, yep. South Korea, right, happening right now and in the past. A force more powerful, yep, John, that ICNC, who I used to work with for 4 years, produced the film, A Force More Powerful, and documented a lot of this civil resistance and stories across the world. Martin Luther King, yep. Georgia, yep, currently ongoing. Coalitions, Mahatma Gandhi, very much a part of him. So yeah, so as I said, I know people in the room are very kind of knowledgeable on these issues. And, you know, you'll know the one to the right with is Rosa Parks. Sometimes people think that she went it alone, but we know now that she was very much a part of the movement, the civil rights movement, that they planned her civil disobedience, which is breaking unjust rules or laws for higher purposes, and that her sitting in the front of the bus where she was not supposed to be under Jim Crow laws during the civil rights movement, that drove the whole push toward the Montgomery bus boycott and really created a lot of change and a lot of momentum for the civil rights movement. On the left, does anyone recognize where this might be? It's a little bit more unusual space. So the left is in Burkina Faso, and this is a very specific symbolism, and I wanted to really get into how important the locally led symbols and understanding is to drive movements and campaigns. And this is when they overthrew Blaise Pascal, who was a long-term dictator in Burkina Faso, back in the early 2000, like 10, 11, 12, that period. And basically there was a whole movement that I got to go and visit and learn from called Le Ballet Citoyen, and I'll mention them again in a minute. But what they are doing is using these brushes, and this is what women use to clean the house and the area around the floors. And for their symbolism, when the women brings this out, not just to clean, but as like a symbol, it means she's had enough. It's a very serious thing. And it could be with her husband, it could be with the family, it could be with the community, but it means we're going to wash away and sweep away corruption, evil, you know, oppression, violence, all of those kinds of things. We're going to sweep it away. And in their campaign, they had a lot of youth coming out and a lot of men. But until the women came out in hundreds of thousands of people into the streets, and they used the symbol, which was very, a lot of people in their society recognized it and understood it. That was what really pushed their movement over the edge to be able to get a new person in power and to try to move toward democracy. They're still struggling, which many of these people are. And when I talk about, when I train in the field all over the world, you know, we recognize that basically you're never done. People have asked me, I still remember in Cameroon, we did a series of trainings to a lot of villages and opposition groups that are dealing with the Anglophone issue and very poor resources and a lot of violence against their side of the country. And a lot of them were asking, well, when will we be done with this? When will this be over? When will we win? And I said, you know, I hate to give you the bad news, but as far as I have seen, there is really no time that that happens, that if you pull back and are no longer engaged as peace builders or people working for positive change, sometimes the opponents or the other forces push back and then you're back where you started. And so you really, it's an ongoing process to improve society, to create change, and to keep moving on. It really never stops. Do it again. Yeah, it's just for some reason, I don't know why my computer is stuck with this. So just bear with me on this a little bit, because another thing I could try to do is to maybe go out of the mode of, yeah, it's just freezing for some reason. So bear with me. I'm going to try to escape and go into the mode that is not presentation, if I can do that. And then maybe it will stop sticking so much. Yeah, no. So sorry, again, apologies. I'm just going to start again with the sharing and go to another, let's try another screen. Okay, so sorry, I'm going to do it from this perspective because the other one is just not, it's not working in the same way it should be. Okay, so conflict transformation, that's what I would like to talk about next. Conflict transformation basically combines these two areas of work, and I'll try to, yeah, I can blow it up like that at least to help. It basically is an umbrella term that for me basically is defined of processes that change or transform violent conflict into nonviolent conflict or positive peace. So just to make it clear, conflict is not always negative. It's not always bad. And I really try to support people when we're talking about the bad kind of conflict that we want to change and address, to really, you know, talk about violent conflict, because conflict can just mean diverse opinions. It can be important within relationships, communities where there's a status quo that might be supporting structural violence or cultural violence, and you need some kind of disruption or conflict to get it moving toward peace, which is kind of the end game, peace with justice or positive peace. But so it's a process that changes violent conflict into nonviolent conflict. It's where individuals use various institutional methods. So those are things like voting, political parties, judicial cases, legal mechanisms, or extra institutional channels and methods. And those are things that are outside kind of the normal institutional channels. Those could be things like labor strikes. They could be things like resigning from positions over policies that you don't agree with. They could be things like marches or protests in countries where those are not the norm, or they They are possibly even illegal. So those are kinds of things that can be used to address root causes of violence and to build positive peace. This conflict transformation, it's a menu, and it utilizes nonviolent action. And I will mention more about all of those kind of tactics that we use and see, and peace building processes to address societal problems and improve relationships between conflict stakeholders. And then it also, nonviolent activists and peace builders are all change makers, and they are people fostering change. And I believe, over my pretty long-term experience now in a lot of different examples, that using them together is the most effective to really create change. And I'll talk a little bit more about why. So let me just stop for a quick minute, and is, again, not for long, but is there any burning comment or something that people would like to ask, or anything you would like to say at this point? Does that make sense so far? Maybe yes or no in the chat, just to get a sense on, okay, Cameroon, yes, we'll talk about that. Okay, yeah, interesting that Quanis talks about, yeah, the people dying by suicide and gun violence, and how critical and much a part of our society, and how much a challenge really that is. Okay, and Peter says, yeah, it makes sense. Okay, so we'll keep going along. Hold on, here we go. Come on, little. Okay, so what I've also included here is the Rotary four-way test, since this is one thing that Rotary Peace Fellows and Rotarians have in common, is kind of knowledge of this. And I think, honestly, looking at it, this is very connected with what I am working with, what I'm talking about, and ways that we're going to get to the world that we want to build, a more peaceful and just world. So first of all, is it the truth? And there's this idea that there's timelessness in truth, and that truth cannot exist without justice. And I would say peace also cannot really exist without justice, not in a sustainable way. Second one, is it fair to all concerned? So this idea of, either doing business at arm's length, and maybe doing it in ways that may hurt others or hurt society or the environment, versus this kind of idea of fair to all, so that you're building relationships and you're really creating a win-win environment. And again, in this area of peace building, a lot of what we're looking at is this fair to people that are different ethnicities, different genders, different religions, whatever that may be in the society. Will it build goodwill and better friendships? So humans by nature, they're cooperative, and we really believe, I believe it's our natural instinct to express love, community, coalition, that's the way as a species we've really survived and have thrived. And, again, Barbara, I think, was the one that mentioned love as part of peace as well. And then Gandhi also talked about, if you can look your enemy or your opponent in the eye and find the humanness in their soul, find the connection between being human, that's a really important part of nonviolence, but also nonviolent struggle at times. And then, will it be beneficial to all concerned? So this is the idea, I think, also of win-win, that it doesn't mean that if I win, you lose. Doesn't mean that if that there is a one-size pie that we have to divide up and someone will lose something. I'm sure we all have to compromise in a lot of ways. We may not get everything we want, but looking at, really ways to do a win-win and what's beneficial to all. And part of these struggles and peace building and change makers, in the end, that's what they're looking for. And that's what we're looking for as well. How do you create a win-win and beneficial to everyone? So I think it fits right in with the Rotary four-way test. So a core argument around conflict transformation is that both nonviolent action, civil resistance, people power, whatever you want to call it, and peace building approaches, direct action versus kind of dialogue and conflict resolution, they are both necessary to transform violent conflict and to increase the likelihood that groups will achieve their goals. And here I'm just mentioning that peace and conflict prevention, as we know, is one of the main areas of work for Rotary. And so I've been doing quite a bit with people on some global grants and doing a lot of research on the different pillars and how they fit together. And again, having seen the people that are here at this meeting, and Jim, I think the group you are bringing together, many of you here are working on that peace and conflict prevention pillar, or are aware of it or support it. And I would just say that I think it's a key part of all of our work in the other areas. So whether it's community and economic development, whether it's environmental and climate crisis, and environmental justice, whether it's around illness or education, all of those, this peace building and this pillar of peace and peace with justice and positive peace, unless you have that, you're really going to have a hard time sustaining any other improvement in the other areas. It's very difficult to do that and to sustain them unless you're also paying a lot of attention to peace and conflict prevention. And I would just say that I'm so supportive, and I'm hoping that over the years that basically with the Rotary, that we will become more and more focused on the peace building, give more and more resources there, and make sure that more and more grants and resources are going to that area. I want to look at a definition of nonviolent action, because we're going to talk both about peace building and nonviolent action. And I think in general, people know more about the field of peace building than nonviolent action, although I'm sure people know both at times. But it's also known as people power. You like someone mentioned South Korea. We're hearing that right now. They just pushed back martial law because they were really organized and educated and understood how to do this well, how not to break out in violence, but how to come to the streets, how to make their voices heard, and hold on to their democracy. And so far, they've been very successful, and we'll hope that holds. And then also, it's a method for advancing social, political, and economic change. And it includes tactics such as protest, non-cooperation, intervention, designed to shift power in a conflict without the threat or use of violence. Okay, and power becomes a really important part of this, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit next. So just hold on to that. I think that is something that is too often left out of the field of peace building, the more traditional field. And that's why I like the conflict transformation umbrella and bringing all of these concepts together. And the World Without Ending War 101, their also curriculum had a whole section when I took it on nonviolent direct action, civil resistance, and power issues, which I really, really appreciated and I thought was really critical. And it's grounded in a respect for universal human rights that aim to build more just and inclusive societies. So this idea of nonviolent direct action or civil resistance, it differs a little from the concept of nonviolence, which is a principled way of life that rejects violence for moral or ethical reasons. So there can be a strategic nonviolent action decision made, but I think where it's most effective is where the two are together, where people are looking at both the nonviolent action and peace building together, and then nonviolence with the nonviolent direct action. Gandhi said, and people don't always remember this, and even India now has kind of pulled back on it when I've been there, is that injustice is wrong and we have to address it and we have to act against it. If we can do that nonviolently, it's much better, it's much more effective, it's sustainable, it's much less cost to the people and societies involved. But if you can't do it that way, you're not able, then acting is better than doing nothing against injustice. And that's, a very kind of powerful thing to understand, that even Gandhi was looking at this as, injustice has to be acted against. Nonviolence is the best way and the most effective, he believed. But if you can't do it that way, then acting somehow is better than nothing. Let's see, we've got injustice, and I'm looking in the chat now, and corruption is the biggest problem in our society. Vivek, I would agree a lot that everywhere we're working where there's a lot of issues, corruption is part of that picture. Sometimes I would say a symptom and sometimes a driver. And we've got this book that we're working on, and Silence is Violence. Love that too. And that's very much in what I was talking about with Gandhi. Let's look at power a little bit. So I want, sorry about that. It's driving me a little bit nuts. Okay, there. So basically, this is a picture. Now we could have Sisi there, but I wanted to do it a little bit more historic, of Mubarak in Egypt before the People Power campaign in the early 2011 and 12 that started the Arab Spring, which did not turn out as expected. So a lot of people don't like to call it that, but it was termed that at the time. Um, this is the traditional view. And if you could put in the chat just yes or no, that this is something that you were raised with or learned in college or learned through the news or the press in the US or other places in the world, that this is really what power is. And so in this view, power is power over, we would call it. So it's this idea of elite and elite organizations are inherently powerful and kind of at the top of society. The power structure is immobile. It's very difficult to change. And power basically comes from control of all resources, control of information, and violence or the threat of violence. And it very much is top down. So someone at the top is, having the power and putting it over other people. How many people, let's see. So Vivek, let's see, paradoxical ever, peace building, we teach peace to others. Okay, yeah. Just kind of a general comment about the importance of the four-way test. Peter, yes, that's something that I learned. This was the view of power that I learned in my master's in international development and international relations. And I think what a lot of people learn, because again, elites and the powers over are controlling a lot of where we get our education or information. And so that also tends to be one of the kind of the parables or the story of what power is. Now, in the new kind of looking at the last several years and people power movements and social justice movements, it's this pluralistic view of power. So this view is bottom up. This is this idea that power comes from consent and obedience. Power resides among all of us, among all people in different ways. Power comes from multiple sources, not just the things that the top or the elite or the moneyed people hang on to. Power is fragile. And actually, we see in the world today that, a lot of dictatorships or structures are falling down. The big challenge is, what do you do in the middle of that so you don't have a vacuum state or a failed state? And what do you do to replace it? And how do you do that? How do you make that happen? So that's the biggest challenge, but we're finding that power structures can actually fall fairly easily, fairly quickly. And then again, the power can change. So anybody have anything that you'd like to say about that? And you could either raise your hand or put it in the chat or whatever, but okay, so true, Quanta. Yeah. I think it's really important, if we believe in this idea of people power and real peace building and real conflict transformation, we have to believe that this is the way power can work. That this power, it's not power over really, but it can also be power from the bottom up and power from the people. Okay, Paxson, you have a comment or a question, go for it.
Yeah, in my book, I actually try to be careful to say things like faux power. I spell it with the
Ah,
AUX dash power. And then I try to say that power is something that is unique to the individual's ability to shift into the healthy adaptations of their evolution. And as we do this together as a group, we all have that true power, whereas there's this faux power that is quite literally our foe and fake at the same time.
love it. I love that. And I hadn't heard that before. We're going to talk a little bit more about a couple of other ways to look at it, but I am going to keep that in mind. I love it, and I'll probably be using it. So I'll give you credit. I love it. So non-traditional views of power, and these are connected to a lot of this new school of power and also to Hannah Arendt, who I really love, and as most of you know, was a part of the Holocaust. a Jewish person in Germany and was writing a lot about what allowed the Holocaust to happen, what were the dynamics, the processes, and talking a lot about bureaucratic power and power. So she talks a lot about power within, which is related to a person's sense of self-worth, self-knowledge. It includes the capacity to imagine and have hope, which we really need right now. It realizes that every person has the possibility to influence the course of our own lives and to change them. And that's really the word agency. And a lot of places in the world that I initially go to where people are very vulnerable, marginalized, lower caste, women that may have not been educated or been very abused for their gender, they have never felt this idea of agency. I think most of us in the room have, but the idea is once they become aware and practice it and understand it, it never goes away. It's like a bicycle riding. Once you've got it, it doesn't go away. And that's why so many of these movements around the world, including in the United States, they go in a process. Things may go well, they may be pushed back, but because people have felt the agency and the fact that they can actually make a change, things move forward and they never lose that. And then to develop and realize one's power within is crucial in any empowerment process. And again, as we're funding peace building and working with groups around the world, we have to remember that building up this power within and agency is really critical in all of our programs. The second part is power with, and Paxton, you mentioned, I think, a little bit of this, which is relating to finding common ground among different people, building our collective strength, an awareness that others are part of the same experience, that a lot of the issues are structural or systemic, not necessarily due to an individual's fault, or your own fault. If you're poor, people used to be blamed for being poor. They were just lazy or they didn't, work hard enough. No, it was a structural issue. It can strengthen the self-esteem of people within the group, and it's related to building numbers, building collective power, coalition building, forming organizations, networks. And this is a big part of what Solidarity 2020 and Beyond, which I'll talk about in a minute, came out of. And I picture Rotary. To me, Rotary is a great example. The foundation, Rotary International, Rotary Clubs, Rotary Peacebuilders, Rotary Actors, Positive Peace Actors, all of us are working with partnerships and coalitions and groups around the world to build this power with, to make change. Okay, so very quickly, I'm not going to go into this. I could do a 4-day workshop on this, which we do often in the field. But there are a number of different kinds of tactics and methods in nonviolent action. And those include the category of protest and persuasion, which these are based on Gene Sharp. There's some more recent academic focus by Michael Beer at Nonviolence International as well, who's written an updated book on this. But this idea of, there are vigils, there are protests, there are giving letters to soldiers or roses to the military, or ideas to try to persuade the other side and what I would call as our opponent. There is a little bit harder, which is non-cooperation. Those are strikes. Those are boycotts. Those are withdrawing money from the bank at once. Those are shaming officials that are corrupt or that are, authoritarian. And then there's intervention and disruption, which is blocking roads, refusing to move from parliaments, at school protests, taking over the middle center of places or the major plaza in cities. And then there are alternative institutions and constructive engagement. And I feel like this is where Rotary has a lot of focus in our peace building, which is this idea of building alternative systems to replace those that are not doing so well and to act as another option. And that, mutual aid, alternative schooling, parallel governing institutions. There's a lot of places, let's say in Mexico with the Zapatistas or Guerrero, where they've developed their own judicial systems based on some of the indigenous models, because the Mexico system was corrupt at times. And so there's a lot of different ways you can have your own bartering systems to get away from certain economic systems. So there's a lot of different ways that you can do this. And we're not going to spend a lot of time there. I wanted to just show this again. This is part of the Ending War 101 as well, but I worked closely with Erica Chenoweth and Maria Stefan at International Center on Nonviolent Conflict, where I worked for 4 or 5 years as the director of their field programs around the world. And basically, this was a really interesting, they did a study of 100 years of all of the movements and campaigns they could find for change at a national level. And so that included all the anti-colonialist struggles, the anti-imperialist struggles, racial justice struggles. You know, there was a whole bunch of them. They found over 300. And then within those, they did an analysis. And it was fascinating to find that almost 60% of the nonviolent campaigns were successful over 5 years to build a free and open democratic society. And even those that failed, about more than 30% led to that in 5 years. So we're looking at, you know, up into the 90 percentile. If you have a very strong nonviolent national movement with lots of people involved, you're going to head toward democracy and more open societies. If, however, you used armed struggle, you've got a 5% chance, if you want it, within 5 years, it's going to be an open society, and like a 4% chance that those have failed, so no more than 10% overall. And when I'm in the field speaking to people, let's say in Uganda or Sierra Leone or places in Latin America that might be looking at some armed struggle or more violent ways of creating change, and when they see this information and we discuss the reasons behind it, a lot of them will say, yes, that makes sense to us. We saw what our parents did. We saw the time they spent in the jungles once they did a more violent armed struggle against, you know, authoritarian power. We saw that it destroyed society, it destroyed our infrastructure, and we'd like to really try this other way, especially if we know that it can work and that it can be effective. So I'm just checking the chat. Yeah, misuse of power, lacking self-respect, talking about the faux power, which I love. Okay, now, just very quick on peace building, since I think those people in the room know a lot more about that. And then I'm gonna talk a little bit about our work at Solidarity, which was based on all of the information we had for those of us that founded and developed it. So peace building is an umbrella term also, and there's a wide and diverse range of actors in government and civil society efforts that are included. So you can look at, you know, addressing conflict community, regional, personal, national, international levels through participatory processes that include dialogue, include mediation, include collective problem solving, include conflict resolution, include nonviolent communication. There's a whole series. And then it refers to this wide spectrum that we're looking at transforming conflict. And you can also look in broader community economic development, participatory government, and programs to bring people together and to deal with conflict. In general, peace building has a lot of positives, both with the nonviolent action part of the spectrum and with itself. So it uses inclusive processes in general to develop solutions that will satisfy all kinds of groups and those interests, which make it more sustainable. It's community-led dialogue a lot of times. And even within nonviolent campaigns or movements, you're going to need to have negotiations and dialogue and mediation between various groups you're trying to bring together in society to work for change. It develops creative solutions and allows people to negotiate sustainable outcomes between a nonviolent movement and the external groups, either whether they're opponent or stakeholders of some kind. And that would be going into a peace process, transitional justice situation, lots of other kinds of situations. And then some of the weakness, which I've mentioned, I feel of peace building, more traditional, are that dialogue and negotiation do not work if there are major power imbalances. And usually where major power imbalances are present, it's because one of the members, which is the one that has power over, and whether you call it, you know, power over, violence, threat of violence, they are either faking getting to the table and trying to create a process to create the status quo, or, right, there's no trust. They really don't care about a win-win solution. And you cannot force that on someone. Mediation and dialogue works really well where they're close to the same power level and there's a trust that we want to get to a win-win solution together. Without that, you have to look at some kind of disruption or change in the power structure to be able to get to that place. And so, I would suggest doing it nonviolently for the reasons that we've talked about, because it is more sustainable. It doesn't destroy communities. It has a lower cost overall for people. And it works in the end. It's more sustainable. Okay, so again, major research and reports on synergizing this nonviolent action and peace building shows that it strengthens the effort of people working for social justice, human rights, political freedom, inclusion, environment, self-determination. You can go on and on and on. But using the two together under this conflict transformation umbrella is really effective. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about Solidarity 2020 and beyond, and then we'll have probably 10 minutes. I'll try to go fast through this for questions and comments. We've had some as we've gone along. So it was co-founded by 3 Rotary Peace Fellows. I was one of those at Chulalongkorn, and Marita Rainbird from Finland and Vedrano Bacina from Croatia were the other 2. It was during the outbreak of COVID, thus the name, Solidarity 2020 and beyond. We wanted to really hold on to that 2020 key time where many things in our world were changing and there were opportunities and there were threats and no one quite knew how we were going to get through it together. And it started from a lot of activists and organizers that I had worked with over 20, 30 years, many in the field, and also Marita and Vedran and others who were starting to contact us and asking for support to build an international network because they themselves were stuck in a very narrow focus to survive in their own countries. They were being pushed back in their homes. Their movements were being stopped under the guise of COVID safety. Women's child marriages were going up. Abuse against women was going up, land theft was going up, all of these things that they had been working against that now they were pushed back into their houses, into spaces where they couldn't get out and really work on the change. And so they wanted to try to band together and create a space where they could support each other, be connected to each other, share learning with each other, and do common actions to build people power and impact. So we started that. We did a lot of research to make sure it didn't already exist, which it did not at the grassroots level. And so we're looking at empowering, connecting, supporting seasoned grassroots and locally led initiatives for change and building people power and building impact through these various regions and numbers. We have about 200 plus members that are seasoned human rights defenders, activists, peace builders, leaders, that are the key people driving everything, and they come from about 80 countries and about another 100 areas in general of different kinds of campaigns and movements around that. And we work on 5 main areas: expert level, synergizing nonviolent action and peace building training and youth leadership, convening, learning, and sharing, and that's with conferences, webinars, internal teach-ins, articles, research, all kinds of ways to do that. Participatory research, trauma healing and self-care, which is another big area of need for people that are on the front lines that are being arrested or tortured or their homes destroyed or having to run consistently. We have a lot of people in Sudan and we work with in Palestine and Burma and Myanmar that are all experiencing a lot of high levels of trauma, among others, now Syria. And working on also building enabling environments through resources. So giving them small and emergency grants when they have to relocate, when they're in jail, when they need a lawyer, when they have lost their livelihood to get by for a while, when they're really sick and can't afford the health care, whatever it might be, to keep them strong and healthy and going. And then also connecting them to international legal mechanisms, UN special rapporteurs, EU commissions, African Union groups, Inter-American Commission groups. So groups around the world that can enable and support and protect their work. And then I've got a few pictures. This one is in Tanzania, and that is, we had a African-wide training and curriculum building for nonviolent resistance and peace building, and these represent about 25 different countries in Africa that people were coming from. Action Aid Denmark helped fund that one. We have an ongoing project right now called Activists Hosting Activists, where we're exchanging 10 different partnerships around the world, working on the same issues, but to be embedded in their own movements and campaigns and live with each other and learn and share. We have a lot of regional cohorts that we've developed that work together at the regional level. And then we work on things like land grab and climate crisis, the Mekong River countries. We're working on women's rights and gender-based violence, Kenya, Uganda, Palestine, Lebanon, Cameroon, Guinea, Guatemala, Pakistan, Nigeria, self-determination movements all over the world, transitional justice through an international network of victims and survivors that includes Nepal, Colombia, Syria, Argentina, Chile, Rwanda, South Africa, and issues around extractive industries in Zimbabwe, El Salvador, Laos, India, and the DRC. So these are just very few examples of the many different kinds of work that people are doing. Here's a picture of Ruth Mumbi, who was there at the beginning. She's 2 over from me. She had very short hair there. And they were working, they had me there at Mathari, where they had first started and were all had grown up and lived in the informal settlement and started their nationwide women's groups and women's initiatives for peace. They now have a women's cooperative Kenya that we're working with. This is in Nigeria, in Abuja, with the Chibok girls, the group there that was meeting every single day to try to get the women that were kidnapped in northern Nigeria back. Here's in Palestine on the wall, and to exist is to resist. So just, having families, living, having weddings, staying alive is a key part of what's happening there right now for nonviolent resistance. And here's in India. This is out of Kolkata, up far north, with a tribal group of women that were very lower caste, so-called. Most of them were illiterate, but they were amazingly organized, and we taught them all with the training. Arnab is on the left. And together we taught them through pictures and theater and songs and all kinds of ways to get across the strategic learning that didn't entail reading, because most of them had not been able to go to school. And I want to end with this quote that at Solidarity 2020 and beyond, we believe that by connecting, sharing, learning, and working in solidarity with informed others on the front line for positive change around the world, we can build people power and share and combine resources and knowledge to tackle the most critical issues facing us today. We use strategic and proven top-down, bottom-up strategies, combining peace building and nonviolent action to increase our impact and sustainability. And I just want to say that many of our partnerships and my partnerships also, we do have a lot of peace fellows that are part of our network in various parts of the world. And my connection with Rotary has been a really important and positive part of getting resources to some of the groups in the field, getting knowledge and information, and a lot of amazing network with amazing people, many of whom are here today that I really appreciate. So that is where I will stop the PowerPoint, and sorry that it had those glitches. But yeah, so I know that we're getting toward the end, but if anybody, I want to catch up in the chat, also has comments or wants to give examples on their own or has questions, please do not hesitate to ask.
Anne Frisch has a question.
Anne.
I have a comment, for which I'd be glad for your response. A month ago, I would have said, this is exactly the way we need to go in Rotary. We now have several years of action on ceasefire and action to help people in Ukraine.
Yeah.
I would have said, this is exactly the way we need to go. we have one small problem that is going to stop it. And that is that there is a resolution in the Council on Legislation, which means it's a damn rule,
Ah.
to further silence Rotarians. And if you think you haven't had enough of it's too political, talk to me afterwards. I've had 8 years.
Mm.
It is a vote to take all the silencing rules in Rotary and put them in the bylaws. They are now hidden in the Rotary Club Constitution, where it looks like it just applies to Rotarians and their clubs. Who would have known this was going to pop up, except that there were 2 resolutions in the Council on Resolutions, and you might not have known this, but I've been tracking this for 5 years. I was astonished to see that 2 silencing rules, one from the Middle East, the Gaza area, and
Yep.
one
Yep.
from Tokyo, 2 further silence us, and it passed 3-1. So if Rotary chooses, they could both implement the resolutions that binds officers and enjoins them not to speak in favor or against any international issue, and
Mm.
very pervasive political. If it passes, it will pass. I tell you that right now. We need to be ready. And I have committed to myself and to a few other Rotarians that if it passes within 24 hours of board action, I will break the rule very broadly and come out and support Gaza and say that we should be doing for Gaza exactly what we did for Ukraine, and let the chips fall where they may.
Mm. Thank you, Anne. I didn't know anything about that, and that is very concerning from what you're saying. Again, this whole idea that you can be non-political and be a peace builder and work for justice is just not true. It doesn't have to be political with a capital P, like a party. That is understandable. But the concept of, politics is how we govern ourselves, corruption or not, justice or not, equality, freedom, all of those things that, that we stand for as peace builders. And so, it's very concerning. And I don't know what others think, but for me, I would love to learn more about that. And I so honor your position to take a stance and act. I don't know whether you want to say anything else. There is another question from Peter, Jim, but I don't know whether maybe someone else wants to follow up because I'm not aware of that.
Peter, Paxton has a question.
I was before Paxson, but my hand kind of fell down somehow.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go on.
That's okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate justice.
Love it. Okay.
Thank you. Well, I intentionally put this, it kind of relates to what Anne just said. We have to become actual, real, honest peace practitioners, not preaching peace, but practicing peace. So what I wanted to ask was, like, I speak 3-4 languages, and on a daily basis, I use them interacting with people around the world on various topics, and most of them are also peace and justice related. And most of them say, you have no right to talk about peace, because they know I live in the United States, and people know what is going on. You are the most violent nation. You have 50,000 people dying every day. You're killing each other. You're killing school children. Yep. How to get along with each other. And then you have 900 and some military bases around the world killing people with bombs. So my question is, how can Rotary, with all its power, use hope as a dope, and then at the same time telling people not talk about peace because it's political. Is it about money? Is it about power? I'm trying to understand. Perhaps some of the very intelligent and progressive people can help me to understand. Thank you.
Beautiful.
Mm. Yeah, and again, I would say that, you know, the people in the room, I think you're asking, Quanta, your fellow Rotarians, I'd love to hear any feedback on that. As Martin Luther King said, the US is the biggest purveyor of violence in the world today, and he was assassinated soon thereafter. So I think that's definitely part of what you're saying. Does anyone else have response or have a comment to hers?
Paxton has her hand up, and then Tom has his hand up, and then I can talk about the COL.
Okay, and there's Peter has a question in the chat too that I'm seeing that's been there a while as well.
Perhaps staying on the focus of what a state being united is maybe more strategic to avoid the murder. Being a state that is united isn't what we're actively doing within the loyalty to what is so-called American. And there is that bill that's threatening the nonprofit 501c3 status, and perhaps that's why
Yes.
the board of Rotary is trying to be anti-polarity. But the whole point of peace is focusing on one side of the polarity, and that side is peace. And on that note, you had mentioned domestic violence at one point in time, and I did some research recently on domestic violence within the United States and found that North Dakota tends to have a so-called very low amount of it, but that's not true. The reason why it's like that is because there's low reporting based on the police and the way that police is held accountable. So even though the stats say that North Dakota has a very low amount of domestic violence of all 50 of our states, the truth is that a lot of police reports get deleted, especially within my own experience, having reported human trafficking and having my own police report deleted, police officer in my life. And having no way to hold him accountable other than reporting him to the FBI, and then who knows which FBI agent decided to hold him accountable or not. And so I've had police hack me. They even hacked my name into Saxon as an Anglo-Saxon, but I actually pronounced my name Passion. And so there's just been, I mean, it seems funny, but in reality, you know, I'm trying to protest peace, but not, or I'm trying to be within peace. I am not trying to protest peace. And so it's just a blatant violation of my existence and the existence of others being disrespected. And so it's holding these people in positions of privilege or faux power accountable. And so that's why I'm just trying to stay to myself and be as creative as possible, because that creation is also what makes our states united.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Tom Carlisi?
I want to make a comment about grassroots bottom-up coalitions. Wouldn't it be paradoxical? And following up what you said, if Rotary International is investing in peace building with Rotarians, Rotaractors, peace builders, peace fellows, interactors, what if we all just worked on collaborating more together? What a powerful voice that would be about social action. We're just gathering more and more action while we're doing the work, even though from the top down there's all this politics stuff going on. We can still just do the work, okay? And if we collectively come together, wow, okay? Celebrating that, okay?
Helen, you have a comment?
I put my hand down, Jim, but I was sort of, I had a series of comments as the conversation moved along. First of all, I want to say, Katherine, that was just an inspiring presentation. And I found it just inspiring. Like, so thank you, thank you. I found myself wishing that when those of us in the Rotary Action Group for Peace could pull together, could offer that level of, it was just inspiring. Anyway, thank you. I think that Rotary is concerned about declining numbers, especially in the United States and the Western world or the global North. I think they're terrified about the fact that our numbers are going down, and so they don't want anybody advocating for anything that anybody else might be upset about. So there's a Rotary Club where you win a certain award and you're awarded a beautiful gun with the word Rotary on it. I was kind of horrified when I heard that, but they're not a word is being said because they don't want to lose the club. So I do think that's part of the issue. I also think that we need to speak out, all of us, all the time. Nobody has the right to muzzle us in any way, shape, or form. I mean, I've been advocating for a number of things within Rotary for a while, and more, I'm on the same page as Sam Daly Harris, who wrote the book Reclaiming Our Democracy. We all have to learn how to advocate at the local, regional, government, and global levels for the causes that we believe in, because these are the people who are making the decisions, and we're not crazy over the decisions that our leaders have been making in the last few years. So I feel like nobody can muzzle us. We all want to be speaking out more and more for the kinds of change that we want to see in the world. But so
back to that subject, Helen, but Suzanne, you have a question, comment.
Yeah, just a comment, just reflecting back to your presentation, Catherine. I just wanted to comment that, the way that you showed the sort of integrated or the sort of interrelationship of peace building and civil resistance, or I forget which term you ended up favoring. It seemed very natural and obvious, which it should be. But in reality, the people who do peace building are often very different from the people who do the activism and the nonviolence movements. And because the movements tend to want to, be loud and vocally oppose authority. And the people who do peace building often, or I'm in the conflict resolution field, so, favors kind of being neutral third parties.
Yeah.
And so there's actually a lot of, controversy and debate, certainly within the conflict resolution field, about like, when is it okay to be a neutral and when really is that complicit? So anyway, I just wanted to commend you and your organization for knitting those things together, because it, again, to somebody new to all this, it sounds perfectly natural, but in the world, it really isn't.
Yes.
And if we had more time, I would ask you to expound on how you have experienced and managed those tensions, because I would imagine you have, but we can leave it for another time. So thank you.
One busy lady, and we're very, very glad to have had her. On the issue that Helen and Ann were talking about, I'm a member of the COL and aware of that, but all of these resolutions and all of the COL, the articles are listed on the Rotary website. And inaction is just as bad as being violence in front of violence. Inaction is not an excuse. Yep. Read them. Go on to the Rotary website and read those resolutions and the that are coming up. Find out who your COL rep in your district is and express your opinion strongly. Again, inaction is not an excuse. And if there's any questions on any of these, let me know. Again, I am on the COL again yet this year, and we'll be working for this very issue, because yes, it's a real issue, and no, our voices should not be silenced. Very strong on that. Wow, thank you, thank you, thank you. And Katherine, we are indeed grateful for the work you do and the information you bring to us. And we all thank you for taking the time to share your knowledge, which I know you have so little of. You are running around the world and doing so much to save the world. Thank you, thank you. So next month,
you, can I say just one thing in parting? There was a great question by Peter, but I may not have time to get to
I'm
it
sorry.
on Israel-Palestine. That's okay. And then I did also want to mention that I am planning to go to the Calgary International Conference, kind of drive up from New Mexico and be connected to some Rotary Peace Fellows and Rotarians there. And learn more. And then also in Istanbul for the Peace Center opening and the Peace Conference there. So I'm hoping that some people will be there. We'll be able to see each other there as well. So I don't know whether we should answer that or whether we don't have time. It's up
You
to
can
you.
answer Peter's very, very definitely.
Okay, so Peter.
Mexico needs to be represented here.
He's got a really good question, so I want to read it. It's a little bit up here. Hold on, I'm going to find it again. Okay, so he talked about, I mentioned a little about Israel-Palestine and the imbalance of power, and is that a good example of that, of the one-sidedness? And that may be the main problem. And I would totally concur with that. I've been working on Israel-Palestine for 35 plus years now. A really critical time of my life was when I was a young graduate student at AU in DC and Georgetown, and went on a tour during the first Intifada. It was a human rights delegation, which was their nonviolent uprising for self-determination and freedom and peace. And it didn't work out in the end. And that had a lot to do with the power imbalance and Oslo, which was the so-called peace process that came afterwards, was one of the examples I use when I talk about how this really serious imbalance can, in a peace process, actually lead to a really bad status quo and capacity for the powerful player to continue to oppress and move forward, in this case on the occupation and apartheid and other kinds of things, leading now to what's happening in Gaza, which is a genocide. The ICJ has ruled on that. The ICC, has put out the warrants for both Israeli leaders and Hamas. The Hamas ones have been assassinated already, but also for Amnesty International just came out with a report documenting all of it this week. And so I think that's a key part of the power imbalance. I work there. I'm there at least once a year over the last 35 years. I know people personally in Gaza who I stay in touch with via WhatsApp, whose whole families have been wiped out, who are starving. Some of them are in the north where it's even worse, and they can't get any food. And, the hospitals are being bombed with people in them, all of the schools and shelters. No one has gone to school for an entire year. It's the biggest per capita of kids with amputated limbs of anywhere in the world. And I, as an American, realize my tax dollars are going to pay for all of the bombs and weapons, most of them that are allowing this to continue. And so I would say that this is one area we have to act. And I'm hoping that people within Rotary and all of us will get together and try to, have a concerted front for leading to peace with justice, because what's happening now from the very far right fascist government of Israel is not helping Israel in the world. It's not helping international law or the rule of law. It's not helping the Americans whose money is going for bombs and weapons instead of our own needs at home. And it's definitely, tragedy for the Palestinians, who are very much on the disempowered, lack of power side of things in the international system. So I would just ask for people to please get involved and speak out.
Thank you. Thank you. I think you have a lot of support on this show. Thank you very much. But I do want to talk about next month. We are eager to hear from John Paul Lederach. John Paul is internationally recognized for his groundbreaking work in the fields of peace building and conflict transformation. John Paul's many books have been the foundation of great peace programs, not the least of which is the Alliance for Peace and other great educational programs. His longer story will be in the mailbox Monday. Also note that the next forum for discussion will be the second Thursday of the month, to give everyone a chance to return home and, where necessary, to be sober. So we look forward to seeing you next month. And again, Katherine, we thank you, thank you, thank you, and for all that you do. Bless you.